The flowers had begun to die. Mara noticed it first in the roses, the deep burgundy ones that had been arranged along the mantelpiece in tall crystal vases, their petals curling inward now like fists closing around a secret. 3 days. That was all it had taken. 3 days for the celebration to begin its quiet unraveling, petal by petal, in the stillness of a house that was not yet her home. She stood at the tall window in the east parlor, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the ground stretched endlessly, manicured hedges, a gravel path that curved toward an iron gate, morning fog sitting low over the grass like something that had no intention of leaving. The sky was the color of old paper, pale, uncommitted. This was the 3rd morning of her marriage. She had not slept well. She had not slept well on any of the 3 nights, though she had lain perfectly still in the dark and matched her breathing to a rhythm that she hoped looked, from the outside, like peace. The room was beautiful. The sheets were expensive. The man sleeping beside her was, by every measure that the world cared to use, a good catch. She set down the cold cup. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock ticked. A door opened and closed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Aldrin, moved through the corridor with the soft, practiced silence of someone who had learned long ago that the people in this house preferred not to be reminded that they were being watched. Mara pressed 2 fingers to the glass. It was cold against her skin. Outside, a single bird landed on the gravel path, looked at nothing in particular, and flew away. She watched it go. She had known Daniel Voss for 4 years before she married him, which was long enough to know his cologne, his preferred table at restaurants, the exact cadence of his laugh when he was performing it for a room. It was not long enough, she understood now, to know him. Their engagement had been celebrated with a dinner at his parents' estate. A long table, candlelight, the clinking of crystal, his mother's pearls catching the light. Everyone had been so genuinely pleased. Her own mother had cried, the good kind of crying, the kind that meant finally and of course and I always knew. Daniel had held her hand on top of the table, his thumb moving in slow circles over her knuckles, and she had smiled until her face remembered how. She had told herself the hesitation was nerves, that the quiet dread she felt in the weeks before the wedding was simply the weight of change, the natural fear of a life reshaping itself. She had told herself a great many things. Eli had been at that dinner. He sat 3 seats down on the opposite side of the table, speaking little, eating less. Daniel's younger brother was 3 years his junior and occupied an entirely different atmosphere. Where Daniel filled rooms, Eli seemed to subtract himself from them. He was not unfriendly. He was careful. There was a difference, and Mara had noticed it without knowing why she noticed it. At the wedding, he had shaken her hand during the receiving line. His grip was brief and formal. "Congratulations," he had said. "Not welcome to the family. Not so glad Daniel found you. Just congratulations, the word you gave to someone who had finished something difficult." She had thought of that word on each of the 3 nights since. The letter arrived with the morning tray. Mrs. Aldrin brought it just after 9. The small silver tray with its carefully folded napkin, the single white cup, the miniature pot of honey that Mara had not asked for but which appeared every morning regardless, as though the house were learning her. Beside the cup, almost incidental, lay an envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, hand-addressed in a script that was careful and deliberate, each letter formed with the kind of attention that belonged to someone who wrote as though the words mattered. No return address, a postmark she couldn't quite read, smudged at one corner, as though the envelope had been held too long before sending. Daniel's name was written on the front. Daniel was on a call in his study. She could hear, faintly through the walls, the low murmur of his voice. Professional, assured, the voice he used when he was being very certain about something. He had been on calls both previous mornings as well. "Business," he had said each time, with the apologetic smile of a man who expected to be forgiven automatically. The envelope had been opened. The seal, a simple adhesive fold, had been separated and not carefully. It had been torn, quickly, the way someone opens something they cannot wait to read or cannot bear to wait to destroy. Mara sat with the envelope in her hands for a long moment. The clock ticked. Outside, the fog had begun to thin. She told herself she would simply leave it on the tray. She read it instead. The letter was 3 pages, written in the same careful hand as the address. The woman's name was Corinne. She did not introduce herself formally. She wrote as someone who assumed she would be recognized, which told Mara something immediately. She wrote plainly, without self-pity, which told Mara something else. The first page spoke of a child. A boy, nearly 2 years old now, with Daniel's eyes and Corinne's stubborn mouth, who lived with Corinne's sister in a town 3 hours north. The second page spoke of a promise Daniel had made and then unmade quietly, the way you unmade things when you had enough money to simply redirect consequences. The third page, the one that made Mara's hands go still, spoke of the wedding. His wedding. It said, I always knew you would find a way to make yourself clean. I always knew you would find a woman who didn't know to look. Mara read it twice. Then she set it down on the breakfast tray, beside the small pot of honey, and sat very quietly for a while. The cold tea was still there. She did not drink it. She found Eli in the garden at the back of the house, near the low stone wall where someone had once trained roses that had since grown wild. He was reading, or he had been reading. The book was closed in his lap, and he was watching the sky with the focused expression of someone thinking through a problem they had not yet solved. He saw her coming and straightened slightly. Not with guilt, with something closer to anticipation. She held out the letter without a word. He looked at it for a moment before he took it. He did not unfold it. He did not need to. She watched his jaw tighten. A small, controlled movement, the kind your body made when it was confirming something it had already carried. You knew, she said. It was not a question. Not all of it. His voice was low. Even. I knew there had been someone. I didn't know about a child. I didn't know. He stopped, pressed his lips together. I didn't know the extent of it. But you knew enough. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be its own answer. I thought it was over, he said finally. He told me it was over. And you believed him. Eli looked at her then. Fully, directly. The way he had carefully avoided looking at her since she had arrived in this house as his brother's fiancée. There was no deflection in it. No performance. Just the uncomfortable honesty of a man who had made a choice he was no longer certain was the right one. I wanted to, he said. They stayed in the garden longer than either of them intended. It was Eli who found the photograph. Not in that moment, but later, when Mara asked quietly if there was anything else she should know. And he had gone inside and come back with something retrieved from a drawer he had clearly opened before. A photograph. Daniel and a woman at what appeared to be a seaside somewhere, laughing, his arm around her shoulders in the easy, proprietary way of someone deeply comfortable with another person. On the back, in different handwriting than the letter, lighter, faster, a date from 14 months ago. 3 months before Daniel had proposed to Mara. She held the photograph for a long time. Eli sat across from her on the low garden wall and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. She appreciated that more than she would have appreciated comfort. Did she love him? Mara asked eventually. Eli considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think she understood him, he said, which might have been more than love and also less. The fog had lifted entirely by now. The morning had resolved itself into a thin, clear winter light that made everything look precise and a little merciless. Somewhere inside the house, Daniel's call had ended. The murmuring had stopped. The silence between Mara and Eli was not empty. It was full of everything they were both carefully not saying. All the observations she had stored since arriving in this house. All the moments she had sensed something underneath the surface without having language for it. She did not say any of those things. Neither did he. But they looked at each other briefly, with the particular recognition of two people who had been telling the truth in a house full of edited versions of it. Daniel came home. She heard his car on the gravel first, the familiar sound of the engine, then the door, then his footsteps crossing the entry hall with the brisk, purposeful rhythm of a man who had resolved something. When he appeared at the back doorway carrying a wrapped bouquet of white flowers, his smile was wide and warm and arrived a half-second too late to be spontaneous. You're in the garden, he said, as though this were a charming discovery. I am, Mara said. He crossed toward her and kissed her cheek. His cologne was the same as always. Over his shoulder, she saw Eli stand slightly from the low wall, and she saw Daniel register it. Register Eli's presence, their proximity, the particular quality of the quiet between them. A shadow moved through Daniel's expression so quickly that if she hadn't been watching for it, she would have missed it entirely. He did not miss it. That night, she found the letter, which she had replaced on the breakfast tray, and then moved to the second drawer of the writing desk in their room. Sitting on top of the desk instead. Not in the drawer. On top of it. Placed there with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who wanted her to know it had been moved, but could not be confirmed as the person who moved it. She stood in front of the desk for a long time. Then she went downstairs. She found him in the sitting room, whiskey in hand, the picture of ease. She stood in the doorway. She had rehearsed nothing. She found she did not need to. Daniel. He looked up. Tell me about Corinne. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. She watched him decide in real time which version of himself to be, the charming one, the wounded one, the one who reframed everything as a misunderstanding. She watched him cycle through the options with the practiced speed of a man who had been managing narratives for a long time. He chose wrongly. Where did you hear that name? The letter. That letter is real, she said. The letter is real, Daniel. The child is real. Answer me. His face changed. The warmth fell away like a coat he'd been too warm in. What was underneath was not monstrous, that would have been simpler. What was underneath was something more ordinary and more disappointing. A man who had always found a way to be the protagonist of his own story, no matter what it cost the people around him. It was complicated, he said. You had a son. It was complicated. You told her it was over. Her voice did not shake. She was surprised to find that it did not shake. You had a son and you told her it was over, and then you came here and you proposed to me and your family. She stopped. Breathed. Your family knew. Silence. Did your parents know? He looked away. Eli had appeared in the doorway behind her. She had not heard him come in, but she felt the shift in the room. Daniel's eyes moved to his brother, and something ugly flickered across his face. An accusation. An old accounting of grievances. You showed her, Daniel said. She found it, Eli said quietly. You could have. What? Eli's voice was still low, but there was something in it now, something that had been pressed down for a long time. What should I have done, Daniel? Tell me specifically. Should I have taken it from her? Hidden it the way your family hid Corinne? Hidden it the way they hid the boy? A glass hit the floor. She was not certain which of them had knocked it. Nobody moved to clean it up. Later, much later, after Daniel had left the room and the house had settled into a thick, exhausted silence, Eli told her the rest. Corinne had been ill. Had been ill for over a year before the wedding, though not everyone had known the severity. She had written the letter months ago, during a period of clarity, and given it to her solicitor with one instruction. It was to be sent 3 days after any marriage that Daniel Voss entered. Not before the wedding. Not during. After, when the choice had already been made, when it could no longer be stopped, only reckoned with. She had done it deliberately. She had decided that Daniel would not be permitted to simply move forward into a new life without truth following him into it. She could not stop him. She could not undo what had been done to her, or to her son, or to whatever woman Daniel charmed next. But she could ensure that the next woman knew. 3 days in, when the celebration had ended, when the reality had begun, when a letter arriving would land with its full weight. Corinne had died 5 weeks before the wedding. Mara sat with that for a long moment. Then she pressed her palm flat against the table in front of her, grounding herself in the cold solidity of it. She never got to see it sent, Mara said. No. She just... Her voice broke slightly, the first time it had broken all day. She just had to trust that it would happen. Yes. She thought about a woman she had never met, in a room she would never see, writing 3 careful pages with the knowledge that she would not be alive to know whether they reached their destination. She thought about that level of precision in the face of that kind of ending. She thought about what it cost a person to be that honest, that deliberately, that finally. She wept. Not for herself. Not even for the marriage. She wept for Corinne, and for the boy with Daniel's eyes, and for the letter that had traveled all this way through time like something that refused to be buried. She packed one bag. Took less time than she expected. She was efficient about it. Underwear, 2 changes of clothes, her passport, the small notebook she wrote in, the photograph of her mother she kept in the inner pocket of her suitcase. She did not take the wedding gifts. She did not take the jewelry Daniel had given her. She took the things that had been hers before she arrived in this house, and she left everything else arranged as carefully as she had found it. Mrs. Aldrin passed her in the corridor and said nothing. But she stepped aside, and something in her expression was not surprise. Eli was at the bottom of the stairs. She had not expected him there. She had prepared, quietly, to simply walk out, to not have to navigate another conversation. Another set of eyes finding hers with too much in them. But he was there, and there was nowhere to redirect herself, so she came down the stairs and stopped 2 steps from the bottom. "You don't have to leave tonight," he said. "I know. It's barely. I know, Eli." She looked at him. "I'm not leaving because I have to. I'm leaving because it's the only honest thing I know how to do right now." He nodded slowly. She could see him choosing his words with the same care she had come to recognize in everything he did. The deliberate quietness of a man who had learned to think before he spoke because someone in his family always spoke before they thought. "She would have liked you," he said. "Corinne. She valued people who didn't look away." Mara was still for a moment. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner," he said. "I told myself I wasn't certain enough. But I think I was just—" He stopped. "I was just a coward about it." "You weren't a coward today," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She did not look back. Not because she was hardening herself, but because she was trusting herself, which was different. The morning was cold and very clear. She stood at the end of the gravel path, by the iron gate, in the same pale light that had filtered through the east parlor window 3 days ago when she had pressed her fingers to the cold glass. Then, she had been watching a bird fly away and had felt the particular loneliness of a person watching things leave. Now she was the thing leaving. Her breath made small clouds in the air. The gate swung open easily. She had expected it to stick. She thought about Corinne's letter, still on the writing desk where she had left it, face up, unfolded. She had not taken it. It had arrived in this house and done what it came to do, and it belonged here now, in the story of this place, in whatever reckoning followed. She had no claim to it. She thought about Eli at the bottom of the stairs, choosing his words carefully, apologizing without collapsing, letting her go without grasping. She thought about her own reflection in the window 3 days ago, the woman who had been standing in someone else's house, in someone else's story, breathing shallowly and calling it peace. The gravel crunched under her feet. The fog was gone. Above the tree line, the sky was doing something extraordinary, going from gray to gold in the slow, irrevocable way of things that cannot be rushed, the light spreading sideways across the clouds like a rumor turning into truth. Mara walked through the gate. Behind her, the iron swung shut with a sound like a sentence ending, clean and final and exactly on time. She kept walking. The road ahead was long and cold and entirely, completely hers.